everyone. This is the Crime Cafe, your podcasting source of great crime, suspense, and thriller writing. I'm your host, Debbie Mack. Before I introduce this week's awesome guest, I'll just remind you that the Crime Cafe box set, that's 9 books in the box set, and the Crime Cafe short story anthology can be purchased online at any online retailer for the very reasonable price of $1.99 for the box set and 99 cents for the anthology. You can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Apple, whatever. So with that said, the buy links, by the way, are on my website, debbiemack.com, DEBBIMACK. And with that said, I'm thrilled to introduce my guest, Lawrence Kelter, fellow New Yorker and thriller author. It's great to have you on, Larry.
Oh, it's great to be here. And please, let's stick with Larry.
Larry, awesome.
Yeah. If I hear Lawrence, I'm going to assume that I've done something wrong or I'm in big trouble. Larry works just fine.
I know what you mean, because when people call me Deborah, I always think of my mother. Deborah!
Exactly.
Exactly. I first got to know your work through the Stephanie Chalize thrillers, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
You're about the only one who does pronounce it correctly.
Stephanie Chalize, I like that.
Thanks.
What a great protagonist she is. What inspired you to go with that series, to write it?
I was and I still am, a big fan of Nelson DeMille, and I got sucked in by his John Corey character. At the time, he only had a couple of books in that series, but now he's up to, I guess, about 7 or 8 in the Corey series. And what I liked about him was he had this acerbic personality. He's always making smart-ass comments, and I like the punch of getting of having a smile when I read. There's a lot of great authors, and you can't take anything away from them, but they're very, very dry, and they'll just go through pages and pages of description. How he approached the crime circle, and there was an inner circle, an outer circle, and a third circle, and it's like, it takes you 4 pages to get through the crime circle, and it's like, what the, But I really like DeMille's character, and I said, I'd like to do something like that. I hadn't written at the time, and I can't copy John Corey, so I kind of borrowed some of his personality traits, and I imbued them in a woman, so to speak. So,
excellent.
So Chalice is supposed to be fun, quirky, a little too savvy for her own good, a little too smart alecky for her own good. But, I think that makes the character, memorable and fun.
Yes, absolutely. And it underscores how she's a human being. She's not like a stereotypical woman or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
I like the fact that you can write that. So much is said about men writing women and women writing men.
Right.
I don't see why men can't write women as authentically as women can.
Right. Well, I'm several books into it now. When I first started out, there were some comments saying that she wasn't a real woman, that she was too much of, a man's vision of a woman. And some of that I think was real, all right, and I think I've kind of absorbed those comments and refined a personality as I went along. She's 7 full books and 3 novellas into the series at this point. So yeah, she's gone through a lot of changes, and there's a life arc involved. She starts out as a single gal detective, and then she gets a partner that she falls in love with, and by the 7th book she's got a child. She's married and has a child. So she's gone through her an evolution, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And do you picture writing more of that series, and where do you think she'll go from here?
I do picture writing more of it. I haven't begun to craft the next book yet, and that's because I just had so many things on the back burner, and at a certain point you either have to move them up in the line, or they're never going to get looked at.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I've done, and as you probably know, I'm involved in a new project, so that's taken up the bulk of my time.
Yes. Uh, Tell me about the Chloe Mather series, the thrillers, the Chloe Mather thrillers. How does Chloe differ from Stephanie? And is this a trilogy, or do you plan to make more out of the series?
Well, what I've done, well, let me take a step back. Chloe Mather is a little bit more straight-laced than Chilisi is. She comes from a military background. Um, as the story goes, she was a Marine or an ex-Marine, now an FBI agent, and in the Marines, she was one of the few women who actually saw active combat. Normally, and I can't speak for the armed forces at this moment in time, but when she was in the armed forces, most female Marines were um, clerical or technical, that kind of thing, or served as liaisons. They never really saw the battlefield. But she was assigned to what they call the female engagement team in the Middle East. And what her assignment was, or what they call it the FET, what the FET was supposed to do was sort of broker the relationship between um, Muslim women and the military, because in that culture, men are not allowed to speak with women they're not married to. So she's able to do that as a woman, and she's out in the Middle East, during um, some of the military offensives, and because she's out there, she got pulled into a couple of real situations, rescues. She was under siege a couple of times. She's a sharpshooter, so she's a little bit more of she's a little bit of a stiffer character.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I'm going to have to check those books out.
Okay. Oh, the second part of what you asked, do I see more Mather? What I did is to kind of keep Mather going and keep Chilisi going at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I've combined them in a new series. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so what I did was in Chalisi's last book, she was critically injured. She's recovering, but because of NYPD protocol, she's on medication, and she's going to be on medication for another 6 or 8 months. And NYPD demanded that she's off medication completely for a full year before she can stay active duty or do a normal tour as a detective. And she just couldn't handle it anymore. She's too much of an A personality. She needed to get back out in the field. So she leaned on her friend Herb Ambler, who's an SSA at the New York City FBI Bureau. And he pulled enough strings, he had enough clout to get her moved over. And now she's an FBI agent, and Mather's an FBI agent, so they're sort of rocking it together.
Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
I'm interested that you combined the two characters, because I could do the same thing with the series that I'm working on, actually. I'm starting a new series, and it also takes place in Maryland, and you've got me thinking now. I think my first taste of your funniest writing was the Frank Mango novel.
Okay.
That's where I really got to see you just kind of go over the top a little bit, and I loved it. It was that wisecracking detective with the name Mango, and he was always getting jibes about that.
Right.
Was that a standalone, or is that part of a series you'd like to write?
I'd like to write more Frank Mango at some point. There was one book which was called Kiss of the Devil's Breath, and then there was a novella or a long short story that I did with this character, and he's fun to write. I try to pick characters that are fun to write. It actually came about before I was writing full time. I worked for a bank, and one of the people I was on the phone with all the time was a guy by the name of Frank Mango. I met him once at some point, but it was very briefly, and it was not repeated. And the name just kept, poking into my head. It's like I couldn't, every time I heard Frank Mango, I said, "Oh, what a great name, for a big fat rumpled detective."
It is. It's a great name. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean the actual Frank Mango that I took the name from, he was nothing like that. So, I hope if he hears that, he doesn't think I picture him as this oaf, which I don't. But um,
But it's a wonderful name. You
yeah,
should be honored. It's a very funny novel and good.
thank you.
That's my personal recommendation to everybody listening. You've also collaborated with one of my previous guests, Frank Zafiro, who is
Mhm.
also one of my favorite authors.
Mhm.
And the book is The Last Color. What can you tell me about that book and about your collaboration process?
That was interesting. Frank and I had both contributed to an anthology, and that's where we kind of met again online, not face to face, because I'm in New York, and at the time I think he was in Spokane. He's since relocated, but he's still out west, and we've never met face to face. But I had this idea for a novel. I had a character that I had once used in a novel that I never pushed through to publishing. I liked the character, but the story did not, didn't grab me enough to, give it a full commitment. So I spoke to Frank and I said, look, I'm looking to do a real police procedural. I said, I'm kind of like, I'm a fake cop. I know cops. I've, been involved with cops, but I'm not a cop, and I'd like to get a partner who really knows the police force, from the inside. And we talked about it a little bit. We really didn't kick it around too long. His biggest concern was that in all the anthologies, not the anthologies, in all the collaborations he's done, and he's done several,
Mm-hmm.
they always had one voice, or they had, no, I'm sorry, they had two voices. Um, so it wasn't necessary to kind of synchronize anything, right? You had two different characters, and they could play off each other. And in the book we wrote, we both picked the same voice. I mean, we both took the same voice. So we were concerned that when all was said and done, you read a chapter and say that's a Larry chapter and that's a Frank chapter, and it would be very disconcerting and not good. Um, but it turns out that after a few edits, and a little smoothing around the edges, that I couldn't tell what I wrote and he couldn't tell what he wrote. So it seemed to work. And then finally we went and sent it out to some people to read, and they said no. So every once in a while I'll come across something that I said, that's one of your picadillos. I know you would say that, but I can't pick it up in the dialogue.
That's awesome. It
Yeah,
just goes to show that writing doesn't have to be a solitary process. It can be totally a collaborative process,
right.
and it can work.
It definitely works. As a matter of fact, it's invigorating or energizing because, well, for more than one reason. I mean, you can also keep something else going on the side, and this was one of
Mhm.
the thoughts when I wanted to collaborate, because I wanted to be a little more productive. But at the same time, I'm capable of starting things independently, but I usually concentrate on one book at a time. Um, but this was different because an email would pop up and he would say, hey, I just completed chapter 16. And he'd send it over to me and I read and say, this is great. Now I know exactly what I'm going to do. And we would feed off each other.
That's
So
fantastic.
yeah, it was really, really a lot of fun. And Frank's a super guy.
He is.
He's good to work with. He's smart. He's a good writer. And, how can you complain about that?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Well, this leads me up to My Cousin Vinny. And if you can believe this, I didn't see the movie until just this year.
Oh, no. Don't
And
tell me
I
that.
was just like, oh my God, this is so good. It's so funny. And
I can't believe you didn't see it till now. I don't know if I can continue this
I know.
conversation.
Oh, come on. Cut me some slack here. There's so
Okay.
many movies,
Uh-huh.
and I wasn't sure what to think of it. But I kept hearing all this stuff about it. So I finally said, okay, I've got, and as a lawyer, it's like I'm a little bit okay about legal movies. But
Right.
this one really nailed it at the same time that it was being funny.
Right.
I mean, there was stuff going on to where I said, yeah, I can actually picture that. And but it was so funny at the same time. And Marissa Tomei is just priceless in it,
He is.
as is, of course, Joe Pesci, who's always priceless in everything.
Mm-hmm.
And Well, I just your brush with the person who eventually led up to your deal on that was remarkable.
Yeah, I think my cousin Vinny, for some whatever reason. I mean, I'm originally from Brooklyn.
Hmm.
I've kind of lived the Vinny experience, not so much with actual mob characters, but with guys from Brooklyn who were kind of like, yeah, right, I'm gonna kick you in the teeth if you don't turn around and walk away. I lived with those people, and then when the movie came out 25 years ago, it touched me. It was just so right on. Um, the guy who wrote the movie, Dale Warner, who's a real comic genius, not only did he write My Cousin Vinny, but he also wrote Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and Ruthless People, three of the funniest movies ever produced. He's not from New York. He's I think from the Midwest originally, and he's been living out on the West Coast for I think forever. Um, but he had this idea. He originally started with a guy, I guess a guy he knew who had to continually take the bar exam, couldn't pass it, and he said, what a great basis for a movie. Um, and he developed my cousin Vinny. So yeah, I mean, really resonated with me. It's the kind of movie that if I'm at home and I'm getting ready to go out or have a meeting to go to, but the TV's on in the background because I always need some noise. I always need music on or the TV on, and you're doing whatever, and all of a sudden you hear, "Yeah, you blend," and that's it. I would like stop whatever I'm doing, and like a robot, I would just sit in front of the TV and I'd relive the movie. And about 2 years ago, those were the exact circumstances that took place. And I said, you know what? This guy's making me laugh for 23 years. As a writer, I think he deserves to know that he hasn't been forgotten about. And the movie's still relevant and still funny. And I said, let me see if I can find out how to contact him. So I spent a little time online, and I was able to. He has a website. I was able to find his website, and a little contact screen. Not too big. Like an inch high and 2 inches wide. And I went in there and I filled in the screen and I said, you need to know that 25 years later, I'm still laughing my ass off. What a great job you did. And I'm such a fan of the movie. And, I said, well, enter, send the message off. I'm never going to hear back. He's Hollywood. So I'm just a lowly novel writer. I'm dirt beneath his feet. I'm never going to hear back. And sure enough, within 20 minutes, he sent me back a 2-page response. Telling me all kinds of things about the movie, not only his insights and his thought process, but things that were really hard to believe about the making of the movie. The most unbelievable was that the studio wanted to cut out Marissa Tomei's character.
Whoa!
I mean, can you imagine that movie without Mona Lisa Vito? It would have been nothing.
No way.
You're right, but they were very, very adamant about it, and they actually said, "You either have to beef up her role, or you have to cut her out. It's not going to stand the way it is." So that famous scene where they're out in the woods, and she's marching back and forth on the deck with her biological clock speech. She's in the printed cat suit, and she's just going off at him.
Mm-hmm.
That scene had to be added after the fact, or not after the movie was complete, but during filming, because they insisted that he beef up the character. Yeah, that's So I mean, talk about things going wrong. How could they for a minute think they could yank her out of the movie?
Well, I tempted to say unbelievable, but unfortunately, I can believe it.
Yeah.
It's well, I'll just leave it at that. Let's just say sometimes unbelievable things happen, but the right stuff gets made anyway, if you know what I mean.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
So yeah.
Yeah. He also wanted. He had a vision of the Rocky character, which really was not Joe Pesci. His original vision for the Rocky. Well, I gave it away. For the Vinny character, not the Rocky character. It was more of a Rocky Balboa. Maybe not a guy who's punch drunk, like Rocky is, with slurred speech, but more of
Underdog?
he's an underdog, but he's also got some physical stature, and in his mind, he
Ah.
also was a former amateur boxer. So he's
Hmm.
he's a bigger guy, he's a bigger, stronger guy than, you look at Joe Pesci. Not that you could get anything over on Joe Pesci, right? He says, "I make you laugh," he'd go kick your butt, but um, his image was a bigger, like a locks of a guy, actually with a touch of dyslexia, because if you remember in the movie, he's always with the book, but he's struggling, he's making a face, he's putting it down, he's closing the book. That's
Hmm.
because he struggles to read, not that he has any intelligence deficit. He just, he struggles to read. And he wanted Robert De Niro to play Vinnie Gambini. And this,
Interesting.
right, this goes back, the movie was released in was 2000 in 1992, 25 years ago, 5 years before Robert De Niro made his first comic appearance in Analyze This, which
Hmm.
was super funny. And he's, Robert De Niro is just so funny as in comedy. But it was 5 years before that movie came out, and the studio head again said, "Robert De Niro make a comedy? Are you daft?" And
Mhm.
basically laughed him off the lot and said, "Well, we're going to hire Joe Pesci." And of course, thank God they did, because Pesci was amazing.
He was,
Yeah, it
yes.
was really amazing. But it's just interesting that you know these studio people. It's like, do they really know what they're doing, or do they just look out when something comes out good? I mean, it's bizarre.
It is bizarre. Speaking of Robert De Niro in comedies, have you ever seen Midnight Run?
I think I've caught part of it. I don't think I've ever seen the whole thing, but
It's hilarious.
yeah. What's the premise of that?
Uh, a white collar criminal, well, an accountant steals money from a gangster,
Mhm.
basically the mafia,
Right.
a mafia don, I guess, and he's arrested in Los Angeles, but he skips bail,
Hmm.
and a what do you call it? Bounty hunter played by Robert De Niro is hired to go to New York and find him. He realizes, he figures out that he's in New York, and he has to get him back to L.A.
Hmm.
And the chain of events that they go through, getting from New York to L.A., it makes the comedy. I don't want to say much more than that.
No, that's enough. Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch that.
There's also a rival bounty hunter who was
Okay.
hired by the same bail bondsman,
Hmm.
who you'll see. It's
Okay.
just and Yaphet Kotto is in it as an FBI agent. His name is Alonzo Mosley,
Hmm.
and one of the running jokes is that Robert De Niro, who plays a guy named Jack,
Hmm.
has stolen his FBI ID, and he goes around impersonating Alonzo Mosley, and
Hmm.
it's just very, very funny. It's like The Odd Couple on the road,
Okay. Okay.
because the accountant is played by Charles Grodin,
Hmm.
so
Okay.
you can just picture this match. I mean, it's
Right.
fantastic. It really is.
Right. Hmm.
You should see it.
I think I'm
So,
okay.
having said that, I'm reading both of your books, both the one that you co-wrote with Frank Zafiro and Back to Brooklyn, and
Right.
enjoying them.
Hmm.
And I'm really glad you could be on the show today. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we conclude?
Hmm. You're not
What
even on
more
the
can you
spot.
say?
Well, the only thing I can say is that writing Back to Brooklyn, which is the My Cousin Vinny sequel, is probably the most fun I've ever had as a writer. I mean, just sitting down at the keyboard, and listening to those two, bicker in my head. It's just, it keeps me going all day long. And, when I finish writing for the day, it's like I just sat down and watched a great comedy movie. I don't want to say great because I'm writing it. I don't want to
But
put
you were
my
inspired by a great movie.
inspired by a great movie. Yeah. And this is what we hope to be the first in a series of books featuring Vinny and Lisa. They'll sort of be a modern day Nick and Nora team, not two stuffy Brits, but, two, two funny partners from Brooklyn, where Lisa does some investigation, and of course Vinny litigates, and a second book is already in the works, and we're also doing a novelization of the movie with new scenes, some background and tidbits about the writer's original thoughts that never made it onto the screen. So new enough and fresh enough to revive the story without just making it a straight translation of what you saw on celluloid. So.
Well, Larry, that is fantastic. I'm very happy for you.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm having fun with it.
That's wonderful. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And I know what you mean about the Brooklyn thing, because I'm from Queens myself.
Right. I remember that.
Yeah. So I know about that.
Right.
And with that, I will just say thank you very much, Larry, for being here today. And again, I'll remind you that you can get the Crime Cafe 9-book set and short story anthology online at crimecafe.net or debbiemack.com. Just go to Crime Cafe, the Crime Cafe link, and the buy button will be there. Buy buttons, whatever. And until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.